In this video, we're going over how to succeed on the U.S. History Regents exam, specifically the short essay set number 1, which is all about relationship between two documents. This is for the new framework exam. The framework exam has 3 different parts. Part 1 is stimulus-based multiple choice. Part 2 is 2 different short essays. And Part 3 is the civic literacy essay. We're going to focus specifically on this part 2, the first essay task you'll be assigned. So in the video, we're going to start by talking about what you should do, what the task is, good tips for it. We'll look at the rubric, and then we'll spend some time actually practicing with a document set and looking at a student exemplar. So on this short essay, for both of them, you're going to get a set of 2 documents, probably 2 primary sources. This could include a written, a text document. I would guess that definitely one of them will be, and that could be a speech, it could be a law, something like that. A map, political cartoon, graph, chart, photograph, or even a painting. And this is what the task is going to be that you'll get. It's going to say exactly these words. What changes is the documents. So the task. Read and analyze the following documents, applying your social studies knowledge and skills to write a short essay of 2 or 3 paragraphs in which you, number 1, describe the historical context surrounding these documents and identify and explain the relationship between the documents, the events and or ideas found in the documents. This could be a cause and effect relationship, or a similarity or difference, or a turning point. Just one of those 3. For both short essays, this first bullet point of the task is going to be exactly the same. It's the second part that changes. So again, we're looking at set number 1, which will be all about relationship. So our first strategy I'm recommending is that each bullet point equals a paragraph. It says you can do 2 or 3 paragraphs. I'm recommending do 2 really full, well-written paragraphs. Because then as you go, you can check off knowing you fully met the task. So make your first paragraph all about describing the historical context, and make your second paragraph where you identify and explain the relationship between what's in the documents. So you do not need an introduction, you don't need a conclusion, you don't need a thesis statement. You're doing these 2 things in a row, each in separate paragraphs, checking off as you go. So that task number 1, that first bullet point, you have to describe the historical context surrounding these documents. That word context, really important word for all parts of your writing tasks. The context is the historical circumstances of what led up to what's happening in the documents. What's the background information of that topic and that time period? This is where you want to think about and brainstorm around what the who, what, when, where, why. You want to identify specifically the time period. You really can't talk about context without naming the time period. And in some cases, you might not know the exact years something is happening, but you should know roughly about when. So, what you can do is, even if you don't know the exact years, you could talk about before something, like before the Civil War, this happened, or after World War II, this happened, or in the 1930s, the 1860s. You can talk, generally speaking, in decades before and after, even if you don't know the exact years of something. Just make sure you give it a time period or name the era: the Progressive Era, Reconstruction, Westward Expansion. So name a rough time period. And then you want to name the people, groups, events, ideas. So if you know the names, always name it, the groups. Anything that you would ever see on a social studies vocab list or your Quizlet set, uh, include all of those specific terms. We don't want to be vague. We want to show what we know by naming, describing, defining any term. And Part of how you're being assessed is your knowledge, so including all relevant outside information. If you just rephrase what's in the documents, it's not going to cut it. You're showing that you understand more than just what's in the documents themselves. Imagine this. An alien has come down from outer space and landed here in the United States. Since they're from another planet, they know nothing about our history, important people, events, beliefs, nothing. The reason I want you to picture that is because I don't want you to write, saying it happened or they, the people. Don't be vague because you want to pretend like you are sitting down an alien or your little sibling and they don't know anything. And you have to explain every single piece to them step by step, nice and carefully. So, again, you want to sit them down and tell them about the time period, the people, the groups, define everything. Don't waste space by just repeating yourself or being vague. Be specific with every single sentence you have. Another tip with that, though, don't get off track. There might be other things you know about that time period, but it might have nothing really to do with the topic at hand or the documents. So if you are writing about 1950s fear of communism and McCarthyism, you might know a bunch about the space race and landing on the moon and NASA. It's happening at the same time, but it has nothing to do with the task of your essay. So don't include it. Just because it's an essay about the home front in World War II doesn't mean you should start naming specific battles happening over in Europe. Just because it's the same time period and you know about it, don't start talking about it unless it is relevant to understanding what's in those documents. Big idea, tell a story. Okay, sit down, have story time in that paragraph. It's the story of the documents. What does your reader need to know before the documents themselves make any sense? Look at those documents. If there's something implied that you should already know about as the reader, then that's what you need to talk about in that first paragraph. Tell them the story. All right, now we're moving to that second bullet point. It's the second task. Identify and explain the relationship between the documents. This is where you name them, whatever it is. The Declaration of Sentiments by Elizabeth Cady Stanton in 1849. Like, name the documents. Use the source information provided to you. So a lot better than saying, in document 1, it says, instead do, in a speech given by Frederick Douglass in this year, he said. Or in this political cartoon that came from this newspaper in this year. Use that source information, introduce, name the documents in that second paragraph. And then you want to be very clear, what is the relationship between the documents? In fact, I recommend that being the first sentence in that second body paragraph, where you just come out and tell your reader, this document and this document show a cause and effect. Make it the topic sentence so that the person grading your exam doesn't have to guess which relationship you're using. Just come out, maybe that first sentence, and say it. This shows a turning point. These two documents show a clear difference in viewpoints. Notice that I have put in big letters the word or. You are only talking about one relationship. Perhaps you looked at the documents and you noticed, oh, I see how these are different, but I also see how it's a cause and effect. Or just because you can see the different ways you can argue it doesn't mean you should do all of it. You don't have time for that on this exam. So you are going to pick one of the three. And if you pick this third bullet point, don't talk about they're similar in this way, but different in this way. Just go all out. Go all out with one. My instinct is that they're more likely to be different than similar. So be very clear. This author thinks this, while this other author feels this way about that same topic. Any of the three arguments can be correct. They're designed that it's not like, oh shoot, she picked turning point when the answer was cause and effect. Any of them can work. It really just depends on how successfully you build your argument and your analysis. So using that analysis language, Like, this resulted in this because of this. Um, when the author made this point, it was very similar to what this author also talked about. Or this is a turning point in US history because before it was like this, while later it was like this. So use that kind of analysis language to make it really clear how well you're doing this. But again, you can pick any of them. It just depends how successfully you make the argument. In that second paragraph, you want to explain the relationship based on the evidence of the documents themselves. So don't generalize, uh, um, use the documents. So you're citing information. How do you know? And when I say citing evidence from the document, it does not mean pulling entire excerpts and quotes. You are supposed to do some of that in the DBQ essay. From looking at the New York State provided examples the teachers got, we did not see any examples where the student had big quotes. Usually a student who is including a big quote didn't know what they were doing and they were trying to fill some space. So you should not be doing giant quotes. You should talk generally. In general, Herbert Hoover feels this way, while in contrast, FDR feels this way about the Great Depression. So summarize the arguments that you're making. It should be based on the actual documents. Again, paraphrasing, or you can use just little quotes. So he describes this thing this way and have just a few words in quotes. But again, you don't want giant excerpts. You don't have time. Clearly connect the events, ideas, or developments in document 1 to document 2. Include that relevant outside information. Again, you're not just rehashing and listing what's in the documents because you need to analyze. The more analysis is, the higher the score. So if you just say this guy says this other guy says this, that's going to be more descriptive. If you want the 5 out of 5, which is what it's graded on, you need to answer the how and why questions. So why would one person feel this way while another person would feel this other way? What's the difference between them, or what's going on at the time? How do you know there's a cause and effect? How do you know there's a turning point? What happens afterwards that signals it's different? It's really providing that analysis will get you the 5 out of 5. Okay, now we're going to look briefly at the rubric. Scored out of 5. There's no partial credit. It's looking at all these different elements in order to come up with an overall score. So let's mainly focus on the 5. The 5 thoroughly develops both aspects of the task, both of those bullet points, by discussing the historical context around these documents and explaining the relationship between the events or ideas found in the documents. So you've really done each bullet point equally thoroughly. Is more analytical than descriptive. So it analyzes or evaluates information. Integrates relevant outside information. Supports the theme with many relevant facts, examples from the document. So again, you've shown what you know and understand from the document. You've interpreted them correctly, and you've put it with your outside information to analyze it. So as it goes down from there, it tends to have less analysis. It's more descriptive. It might do one part of the task more than the other. Then you start to get down to your 1s and 2s. If you only did one part of the task and not the other, you can't get more than a 2. You have maybe no outside information. So that, again, we're shooting for the 5 here. So make sure you're fully doing both parts of the task, analyzing, adding all that outside information, showing what you know, showing you understood what the documents were about, and arguing. All right, now we're going to move into this last part of the video where we're going to actually do an example together. So again, you see, here's the same task, short essay set number 1, historical context, and identifying the relationship. So let's pretend these are the documents thrown down in front of me. What should I do? Okay, so I'm going to do a quick glance to start. I'm going to just check out both of them. I'm going to see that there's 3 amendments. Then I'm going to take a glance at my second document. I see that it's a political cartoon. After previewing the documents, the next thing I'm going to do is look at the source information. So I see this is from the U.S. Constitution. That makes sense because they're amendments. I'm going to notice that specifically each amendment, when they were passed, 1865, 1868, 1870. I'm going to compare the years of my documents. And I see this one was 1876. Again, I'll even do a little markup. I'm going to highlight that. Because one of the first things I need to know, especially if I'm going to do turning point, cause effect, similar difference, I need to know if one of these things happened before the other things, if they're going on at the exact same time. And my context paragraph, I need those years because I need to know what time period I'm talking about. And this has even helped me out by calling it Reconstruction amendments. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to recall any background knowledge I have about the time period because I know that's the first task. Again, before I even read it, I'm going to think, what the heck is Reconstruction? What's happening in the 1860s and 1870s? And I'm going to do a little brainstorm for myself on the side of the paper. So I know Reconstruction is the time period, it's after the Civil War. I know that Lincoln was president, but then he was assassinated. Andrew Johnson became president. When he became president, he had conflict with he became the president, and he's a Democrat. I'm going to remember that he had conflict with the radical Republicans in Congress who were trying to push for more rights for freedmen. They eventually impeach him. I remember that. I remember that later on, there's going to be more restrictions to freedmen. So freedmen, I remember, gained the right to vote, but then there are Jim Crow laws. Just legalized segregation. I remember that. There's going to be things like poll taxes, literacy tests. I'm going to remember there's black codes, there's KKK. So again, that was just a little brainstorm for myself. Sorry if you can't totally read that. And even if you don't write full sentences, I would still just take little notes for yourself. This is where, just based on your studying, your recall about this topic, what Reconstruction is, what's going on in that time period, and even just glancing, I can see it's going to have to do with African Americans, freedmen. So I'm just jotting down what I already remember. Okay, now let's actually read the document. So I've looked at my source, I've thought about the time period a little bit, and now let's look. Amendment 13, Section 1. Neither slavery nor involuntary servitude, except as punishment for a crime whereof the party shall have been duly appropriately convicted, shall exist within the United States or any place subject to their jurisdiction. So I'm annotating as I go, and then I'm going to jot down the gist. Anything I see, what I think it means, I'm going to be doing this while I'm writing right on paper. So basically, the 13th Amendment is there's no more slavery in the United States. Amendment 14. All persons born or naturalized in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof are citizens of the United States and of the state wherein they reside. So I'm noticing this is basically everyone born in U.S. is a citizen. And I'm already thinking to myself, I know the time period, and I know that the point is it's going to include former slaves because they were born here. And Amendment 15. The right of citizens of the United States to vote shall not be denied or abridged by the United States or by any state on account of race, color, or previous condition of servitude. Notice it does not name sex or gender. So this is, again, talking about voting rights, and I know that this is going to give Black men the right to vote. Okay. So overall, I'm seeing some positive things. Look at this federal government is passing these 3 amendments all a few years in a row, ending slavery, giving them citizenship rights, giving Black men the right to vote. Yay. But then when I scroll down here, I'm going to see something that's a little different. I'm going to notice. Let's see if I can do some shapes. Okay, so obviously the center of this cartoon is this guy. Again, this is Harper's Weekly, 1876. I'm noticing that these 2 white guys are holding guns and looking very scary. Okay, so here's the setting, and what is he trying to do? That's a ballot box. And then I'm going to also notice the caption. Always read the title or caption of a political cartoon. Of course, he wants to vote the Democratic ticket. So I see whites threatening Black man trying to vote. This is also going to remind me of some other outside knowledge I have. Blacks were voting for Republicans. Remember, it was the party of Abraham Lincoln. White Southerners were Democrats. So, of course, he was going to vote Democrat. Obviously, he's being threatened and intimidated. So, he's not really exercising his right to vote in the way that he would want. Instead, he supposedly is going to vote for Democrat. So, offhand, I should also immediately start thinking about what's the connection between those 2 things. This is, again, this is where I go back to my notes, my gist. These 3 amendments are giving Black people rights. Here are people taking away a Black man's rights. So I'm going to jot down and start thinking about my options. So how could I do this? So my first option is cause and effect. How could I do that? Well, Reconstruction amendments gave Black people rights, and I know that led to white Southerners doing what they can to take away those rights. Cause, effect. Turning point. This is a pretty big turning point in time for a bunch of reasons, but obviously this is the first time that Black people in the country have any kinds of rights, but they are making sure that those rights are being taken away. So again, depending how I want to do this, the turning point is at first when the Civil War ended. Blacks could vote and run for office. My outside knowledge is that they were doing those things. They there were actually Hiram Revels was the first Black senator. There were Black people in Congress. There were Black people in local offices. So at first, that's what was happening. But by the time of this cartoon, those rights were being limited once the South withdrew, or I'm sorry, once the North withdrew from the South. The Reconstruction regained control of politics through intimidation. Again, this is my outside knowledge too. The KKK, literacy tests, taxes. So at first things are going well, but later they're not. Turning point. Or finally, maybe I think that there's a similarity or difference. Again, it's probably just one, and frankly, it's probably more likely to be difference. Difference. um, Document 1 shows blacks gaining rights. Doc 2, they are taken away. So any of these I could argue, but I'm going to go with the one that I think is the strongest argument. And I think I could most effectively talk about cause and effect, because then I can really get into the first document, why it's happening. And I know I can make the connection of how white Southerners are going to react and take away those rights. So again, I did think through, and even if you don't jot it down on your paper, at least think through how you could make each argument before you go in and pick which one you want to do. Then what I would do is I would take blank paper and I would start to just jot down. If you hadn't done this on the first page, make like a T-chart for yourself, or like a really super basic outline. And I would say, okay, context. I would just start listing things. I know I'm going to make sure I have the time period, Reconstruction era. I'm going to name important people, Lincoln. I'm going to name Johnson. Okay, because I'm thinking who, what, when, where. I know that this is, yeah, if I remembered the time period, that's after Civil War, late 1860. It's specifically it's 1865 to 1877, if I happened to know that. I would think about freedmen, slavery ends. You have to mention that. And I would talk about the politics. And then I would make another paragraph, just jot down for myself the relationship I want to talk about, which is cause and effect. And then I would just list same thing basically I put up here. So again, as long as you do it somewhere, jot down your thoughts before you go into write, you'll at least be organized in some way. Okay. Let's look at a sample student exemplar. It's actually written by a student, really, really excellent essay. So let's see how they successfully made the argument of cause and effect. I'm going to highlight some of the things that they include, because I'm going to be looking for them mentioning the document, them using language, them talking about time period, all those good things. So the first thing they need to do is their context paragraph. So I want to see them naming the time period, the who, what's going on, anything like that. So I'm going to highlight all that. These documents are both from the Reconstruction era. Boom, she named the time period. Do that in the first sentence, which took place after the Civil War. The Civil War took place 1861 to 1865 and was a war between the North and the South in the United States. So she's done a nice job. She's already given me some information, the 101 on what the Civil War is. This war happened because the South seceded due to them feeling as if they had no political power after the election of Abraham Lincoln, a Republican. The South also really wanted to keep the right to own slaves because the slaves gave them free labor to work on their plantations in an agriculturally based economy. Boom. It hasn't taken up that much space, but she has given me a lot of really specific, really excellent information. What the Civil War is, what caused the Civil War, and now she's going to move into the next part. President Abraham Lincoln was president during and after the Civil War. He was assassinated 1865. But before he was assassinated, he made a plan to reconstruct the United States. His main goals were to rebuild the economy, give equality for all, and reunify the North and the South. So she even knows something about the Reconstruction plans. After the 13th, 14th, slaves equal citizens, not property. 15th, slaves can vote, were passed. Many Southerners were angry. So now she's hinting at the response to these amendments. They wanted to keep the blacks oppressed and don't want them to have any rights, including political rights. So now she's naming the reaction. They would threaten black men with violence to instill and fear them. They wouldn't be able to express the rights given to them after the Civil War. Okay, so she's done a beautiful job naming specific time period. She's defining things, explaining why something's happening. Okay, wow, look at that. So she's fully met the first bullet point. So let's see if she meets the second one. Now she needs to identify the relationship. The Reconstruction Amendments caused the events shown in the Harper's Weekly cartoon. Also notice she isn't saying Doc 1 caused Doc 2. She names them. The amendments, which was Doc 1, caused the events shown in the Harper's Weekly cartoon. She named the second document. Because the whites were upset that freedmen were beginning to gain their human rights. So they used violence and fear to scare the freedmen. So now she's starting to describe what's in the actual documents, specifically the right to vote. The 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments abolished slavery and gave freedmen basic human rights. So she's not quoting from the amendments, but she's telling me what they are and what's in them. The 15th Amendment in particular gave freedmen the right to vote, which upset many whites. Cause, effect. So they formed groups like the KKK, really good outside info, to threaten freedmen and maintain white supremacy. There's another term she's including. If the freedmen used their right to vote, they could be lynched. More outside info. In document 2, the cartoon, you can see that there are 2 white men with guns up to a black man's head because he was getting ready to vote. So look at how she's nicely describing the document itself. Ballot box on the left side. The caption of the cartoon says, of course, he wants to vote the Democratic ticket, showing that, she's explaining, showing that white Southerners were also using intimidation in order to limit black political power, meaning forcing them to vote for Democrats instead of Republicans. So she's explained and analyzed the cartoon itself. As time continued, Southern states would also institute poll taxes and literacy tests in order to disenfranchise black voters so they could continue to elect Democrats. So she's explained other outside info of what they're doing and what's the result, who would support racist Jim Crow laws and maintain white supremacy and segregation. More outside info. To review, she has clearly decided in that first sentence what the relationship is. She cited the names of the documents, and then she goes through and she tells me what's in the document, and she explains why. What do the 2 documents have to do to each other? How did one lead to the other? So again, remember all the strategies of annotating, pulling back your prior knowledge, reading, getting to the gist, going through your different options of what you could do, setting up a brief outline for yourself, and then diving all in and making sure you have fully met the criteria to get yourself a 5. Thanks for watching.